You teach people to live by a guiding question. You say it's just simple to ask, what does love require of me in this situation?
Hey, welcome to the Faith Igniting channel. I'm Michael Bridges, executive pastor, and I'm with
Aaron Chivington?
our senior pastor. We rely a lot on Aaron for answers to questions that you send in. Thank you for sending them in, and we'll encourage you to continue to do that. Aaron, a question today. Someone wrote in and asked, are the names on the Gospels, that would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the names on the Gospels the names of the people who actually wrote them?
A great question. And this is one of those that you often don't hear talked about in church circles, in part because it's really not a big issue. And so what I mean by that is first of all, we don't know 100% that the names on the Gospels are who actually wrote them. However, it's somewhat irrelevant. And so let's talk about why it's irrelevant. First of all four of the Gospels have eyewitness material that they were written before, all right, AD 70, except for John. The Gospel of John was probably written later. So they're all written within 20 to 30 years of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. All right. In fact, we can probably trace the Gospel of Mark back to within 15 years of Jesus' life. And we can probably trace the Apostle Paul's works and many of his testimonies and creeds about Jesus to within 3 years of Jesus. So you have all this early work that all verifies, hey, this is what the early church believed, this is what was going on. By the time we get to Origen in 100 AD, around 100 AD, he says there's four Gospels. And so already the church has said, hey, these are the four Gospels, these are the ones that we understand are canonized, these are the ones that were written as eyewitness accounts that the church will stand on forever.
Yes, and canonized means those are the books that were that God led people to assemble into what we now call today the Bible.
Right. And in that, it's important. I love the way this is said. Jesus invented the New Testament. There's people who believe that the New Testament was invented and then we invented Jesus, right? So that Jesus was invented by the New Testament. But the reality of it is Jesus invented the New Testament. Think about it. These guys didn't have anything to write about until Jesus.
Right.
They weren't inspired. There was no reason to write. And then Jesus came along and suddenly there was a reason to write. So what we have then is an interesting question. Like people will say, well, I can't trust them. I don't know who wrote them. I don't know that that's really, that's an illogical statement. There are lots of books that I go, I don't remember who wrote.
Yeah.
I've never met the author. In fact, it could be under a pen name. All right, I read Mark Twain stuff. That's not his real name. I can't tell you what his real name is right now. But again, the pen name that's assigned to the Gospels is somewhat irrelevant in the sense of, is the message consistent with eyewitness accounts? Does it pass the test of coherence with reality at the time and what was consistent with Jesus? Yes, 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 yes. And you just walk through that and you go, okay, then stop. Why are these names with the gospel authors? Well, it would be silly if we're going to make up names to ascribe at least two of the names that are ascribed. So you have Matthew and John. Those are actual apostles, right?
Yes.
And then you have Mark and you have Luke. Now Luke says, hey, I wasn't there. I did the research. I talked to the eyewitnesses. And he's like, I gathered other writings. And that's where we get the Q source, if you're really into biblical studies, this kind of idea that there were fragments of writings that were floating around before they were collected and put into an entire gospel. But
it is reported that Luke, I believe, was the physician to Paul, so he traveled with him.
Right.
And he knew all this. He had access to all of these eyewitnesses.
Right. And remember, Paul spends a lot of time in Jerusalem. So while he's there, Luke's going, hey, I'm going to go talk to Mary, and I'm going to go talk to Mary Magdalene, and I'm going to go talk, and he goes, talks to the eyewitnesses and records all that.
Yeah.
So what we have then is two gospels that if you're going to make up an author, you chose bad people because they're not even apostles. Now, the reason that this...
And what's the second one?
So, Mark and Luke.
Mark and Luke.
Right. Okay. So they're not even apostles if you're going to make up the authors. So what we have, and you can see this in the 2nd and 3rd, 4th century, is the non-canonical gospels or non-biblical gospels, and I would say the made-up stories of Jesus.
And those are the made-up stories.
Right. Okay. So you have the Gospel of Thomas.
Yes.
You have the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. You have the Gospel of Mary. You have the Gospel of Peter. Now, those are 4 Gospels, and there's a bunch more that aren't written until around 200 AD or later. All right, and again, there's the Da Vinci Code's conspiracy that we're keeping these out of the Bible. But when you read them, you go, okay, these stories aren't at all consistent with the four earliest Gospels, right? But we have those four Gospels. So you go Peter, Thomas, Mary, and Mary Magdalene. Now, if I'm going to make up a story and assign authors to them, that's the people I'm going to assign, right? Not Mark. Well, who's Mark? Well, we believe he's the Mark that in the garden when Jesus is arrested, they grab his cloak and he runs away naked, who then follows Paul, right? Again, nobody's going, hey, that's our hero. Let's assign a name to Mark that's, okay. So we assigned a name to Mark. Oh, well,
The reason it was assigned was because it was true.
the reason it was assigned,
Because it was a great idea to make it up for someone that they thought would be highly,
Right.
highly regarded. No, it was just Mark.
Right.
Because it was true.
so again, we got to remember, this is before 100 AD that all these Gospels were in circulation. As early as 10 to 15 years after Jesus' death, it's already bears the title Mark as the author, which again, in early antiquity, that wasn't a big deal. But Mark's the author, and by the time we get to 100 AD with Origen, he's already said, yeah, Mark's the author. Well, there were eyewitnesses all around who would have said, no, 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 Susie over there wrote that gospel, right? So again, I would say, first of all, it doesn't matter to me who wrote them. Like, my faith doesn't hinge on who wrote the gospels. Okay? Just as, again, there are lots of books I don't know who wrote, that doesn't change the authority or the information given, right? But I would say then that there's really no reason to question or doubt the assigned authorship that's to them, especially since it's assigned so early that there were eyewitnesses around who could have said, actually, that's who it is.
Yeah.
And again, the third piece that says, yeah, these are probably who we've assigned them to, is the idea that, well, when you see the later Gospels that weren't actually written by eyewitnesses, that weren't written until 200 or later, then you start to see what we would expect if we were making up stories. Yeah, Peter wrote that. Yeah, Thomas wrote that. Again, really well-known disciples who everybody would have went, yeah, Peter wrote, we got the Gospel of Peter, right?
So these quote gospels that were written much later, Aaron, are they incorrect? I know they're not part of the canon. Are they fiction, or are they reasonable stories that didn't rise to the point of becoming, obviously, because they're not in the Bible? Are they accepted as reasonably accurate?
There are some places where some of the stories you go, okay, that aligns with the four existing
Okay,
Gospels.
okay.
And then there are some stories that you're like, okay, that's really bizarre. And there are other stories where you're like, that just didn't happen. Like, that's craziness. One of my favorites is in the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus is along beside a river, and some boys come to make fun of him, and he's making clay birds. And he just says to them, like, become alive. And they go off and they fly away. And it serves no purpose to validate him as a person or his ministry or his message. It's just a little boy doing miraculous things. And yeah, there's really cool stuff. In the Gospel of Peter, the cross somehow is buried with Jesus in the tomb, and the cross marches out. And it's just this funny thing where now the cross is talking. And again, it's a fun, interesting story, but it's not consistent with history.
Gotcha.
And so we read those and we go, hey, if you want fun, interesting stories that were written 200 to 300 years after Jesus, you can read these. And they're not a secret. You can find them on the internet. You can go to your library and look for the Gospel of Thomas, and they'll have it. But they're not Gospels that are historically accurate.
Yes, and so those Gospels should not be confused with the four Gospels that were inspired, inerrant, affirmed, sufficient, God's authority, put into the canon of the Bible, the 66 books, 27 of the New Testament, that God inspired to go into that. Those are the four Gospels. Those are the ones we should really focus on.
Also written before 90
Yes,
AD.
yes. Aaron, thanks very much for answering that.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and check us out at Faith Ignited Church. Also, our Facebook and YouTube channels, like those for us. And feel free, we'd love to have you join us for a service. Thanks very much.